The world had already ended, but no one remembered the exact moment it happened. It didn't end in a flash, or with sirens wailing across the skies. It ended in silence. The kind of silence that crawls into your bones and eats you from the inside out. It was in this silence that the last known group of 50 survivors made their stand. Haven Point was once a high school, built on a hill and surrounded by thick pine forests that now seemed more like a cage than protection. The survivors had reinforced its perimeter with scavenged fencing, makeshift barricades, and tripwire alarms that rang not with sound, but with blinking red lights, because in this world, sound was a death sentence. The dead had changed. They no longer groaned or dragged themselves through streets in sloppy hordes. These were something else, something worse. Quieter. Smarter. Attracted to the faintest sound, they moved in packs like wolves. The survivors called them whispers. At the center of Haven Point was Commander Reese, former military, late 40s, eyes like steel traps. He stood on the roof, watching the tree lean through binoculars, one hand resting on the radio clipped to his belt, though it hadn't been used in days. They couldn't risk even static. Inside the school, things were tense. Supplies were low, morale even lower. The children, all 5 of them, were the only ones allowed to speak freely, and only in the underground gym, padded and sealed for sound. Everyone else communicated through hand signals, written notes, or the softest whispers imaginable. Among the survivors was a teenager named Kira, barely 18, sharp-witted and angry at everything. She had been on the road with her younger brother Milo when they stumbled across Haven Point 3 weeks ago. She didn't trust easily and had made that very clear. Kira had already clashed twice with Commander Reese, mostly over rules. Reese believed in absolute order, strict silence, patrol shifts, rationing. Kira believed in taking risks if it meant survival. The third argument was brewing when the alarm light blinked red near the south fence. Reese was on it immediately. A silent signal flicked through the air, 2 fingers to the eyes, 1 to the left, 2 to the right. The south team split and moved without a sound. Kira, ignoring protocol, followed, curious and reckless. At the fence, they found what triggered the alarm, 2 rabbits caught in the wire. But the team didn't relax. Nature didn't trip tripwires often. Reese signaled for a perimeter sweep. As the team scattered, Kira noticed something in the mud, footprints, human ones, fresh and deep. She pointed them out to Reese, who tensed immediately. A survivor? A scout? Or worse, a group on the run, desperate and loud. That night, the council met in the main hall, away from the children. The hall was soundproofed with mattresses duct taped to the walls. Reese, Kira, Mara the medic, Julian the engineer, and 3 others sat around a table. If there are people out there, Reese signed slowly, we either bring them in or watch them die. We can't afford more mouths. Mara argued they had to try. Kira agreed, but her reasons were different. If they're out there making noise, they'll bring the whispers down on us whether we like it or not. Julian nodded grimly. Then we make a choice, rescue them or eliminate the threat. The words chilled everyone. The world hadn't just lost civilization. It had lost mercy. The council voted 4-3 in favor of investigating and rescuing, if possible. Reese, outvoted but not convinced, still led the team out at first light. Kira, unsurprisingly, volunteered. They moved like shadows at dawn, 5 of them, armed with crossbows and knives. Guns were for last resorts. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. 2 miles south, they found the remnants of a camp, burned out, bodies torn open, not all of them dead. One of the injured survivors, a man in his 30s, barely conscious, gasped when he saw them. He didn't scream. He mouthed something. They're coming. Reese turned to signal retreat, but it was already too late. From the trees, something moved. Fast. Silent. Shadows breaking between trunks. Kira didn't wait. She grabbed the injured man and began dragging him, heart pounding. The others provided cover, launching silent bolts. 1 hit. The thing collapsed, its face not fully decomposed, its eyes wide and aware. Rhys looked at it and whispered, for the first time in days. They're evolving. Rhys had only seen a few whispers up close before, and never one like this. Its skin wasn't gray and rotted like the others. It was pale, almost intact. The way it moved, calculated, swift, like it understood the hunt. And now it lay dead at his feet, a bolt through its temple, but its eyes still stared, wide and eerily human. Kira didn't stop to look. She half-dragged, half-carried the wounded stranger, her boots slipping in the wet pine needles as they fled. Behind them, the forest was no longer quiet. Not loud, but alive, branches creaking unnaturally, leaves rustling even though the wind had died. Rhys barked a silent order with his fingers, and the team fanned out in a triangle around Kira. The injured man groaned softly. Julian reached over and covered his mouth with shaking hands, eyes wild. They made it back to Haven Point in under 15 minutes, but it felt like an hour. Every crack of a twig felt like a scream. When they reached the gate, the guards at the top didn't hesitate. The emergency hand signal, closed fist over heart, meant immediate entry, no questions. Inside, Haven Point came alive with movement. Not noise, just motion. Doors sealed. Lights dimmed. Patrols doubled. The council gathered once again, this time in the old science lab, where the walls were thicker. Rhys stood by the door, arms crossed. This wasn't just a scout, he whispered. They sent this thing to watch. Maybe to learn. Mara checked the stranger's wounds, her expression grim. He's burning up. Bite on the shoulder. 3 days old, maybe 4. But he's still here. Still human? Julian asked. Barely. We don't have long. Kira leaned over the man. What's your name? She whispered. He opened his eyes, bloodshot and glassy. Tyler. His voice was a rasp. They don't stop. They wait, watch. One of us made them smarter. That silenced the room. Rhys's voice dropped even lower. What does that mean? Tyler's breathing hitched. Camp 37. A lab. Experiment. Thought they could control infection. Weaponize. It backfired. Julian cursed under his breath. They created the whispers? No, Tyler rasped. They helped them evolve. And then he passed out. Kira couldn't sleep that night. She sat on the roof with a bough in her lap, scanning the tree line. The idea that humans helped the whispers become what they were now, that was worse than the infection. That was betrayal on a level she couldn't wrap her mind around. She spotted Rhys down by the south perimeter, talking with the guards. Not signing. Talking. Kira dropped silently and made her way toward him, keeping low. When she got close, she crouched behind the remains of an old dumpster and listened. Rhys, if Tyler's right, we can't stay here. If they're tracking him, we're already dead. Guard, so what do we do? Rhys, get ready to move. If the whispers come, we scatter. We head west. Mountain bunkers. Old FEMA caches. Guard, what about the kids? The wounded? Rhys hesitated. We'll do what we can. That phrase struck Kira hard. She waited until Rhys left, then slipped back into the shadows, heart pounding. He wasn't planning to save everyone. He was planning for a last stand. She'd heard it before, from other leaders. Survivors who thought they were making hard choices, but really, they were just giving up on people. Not again. By morning, Tyler had worsened. Fever spiked. Eyes yellowed. Veins darkened. But he hadn't turned. Not yet. That meant something, maybe hope, maybe danger. Kira gathered a few trusted allies, Mara, Julian, and a wiry ex-con named Trev, who ran food supplies. She told them everything. Mara was furious. He's not even giving the council the truth? Julian rubbed his temples. If we're evacuating, we need time. and silence. We can't all run at once. Kira nodded. Then we buy that time. We hunt the hunters. Trev grinned. Thought you'd never ask. That night, while most of Haven Point huddled inside, Kira led her rogue team into the forest. They wore dampened clothing to reduce scent. They smeared ash and dirt across their faces. They carried silent weapons and adrenaline in their veins. They weren't going to run from the whispers. They were going to find them first. To be continued in Part 3, The Shadow War begins. The forest was darker than usual. The moon, once their silent ally, was shrouded behind thick clouds, leaving Kira and her squad in near blackness. Every step was calculated, every breath shallow. The air itself seemed to pulse with tension. They weren't just walking into danger, they were stalking the unknown. Kira led the group through the trees, her eyes constantly scanning for signs, movement, broken branches, blood, drag marks. Beside her, Julian carried a modified thermal scope rigged from broken binoculars and an old phone screen. Mara had a medic's pack and a small crossbow. Trev, ever the wild card, wielded a machete he called Whisper Killer, etched with tally marks. Julian signaled a heat signature, faint, low to the ground, a few meters ahead. The group halted, crouching into the underbrush. Kira peeked through a bush and froze. There were 3 of them. But they weren't walking. They were crouched, almost kneeling, their bodies still. Listening. Waiting. They're scouting, Julian whispered, barely audible. No, Kira signed. They're trapping. As if to confirm her fear, one of the whispers tilted its head slowly, as if sniffing the air. Then it pointed toward the direction of Haven Point, exactly where they had come from. Trev tightened his grip on the machete. They know. Kira's instincts kicked in. She motioned for Julian to stay put and scan, while she and Trev circled around. Mara would cover from the rear. If they were going to strike, they needed to do it fast, and silently. Trev's blade flashed once in the darkness, clean and precise. The first whisper didn't even get a sound out before it crumpled. Kira loosed a bolt into the second, pinning it to a tree. The third turned, mouth opening, but no scream came. It didn't make noise. Instead, it reached into its jacket and pulled out a flare. Kira lunged just in time, knocking the flare from its hand. But the damage was done. The flare hit the ground and sparked, just enough light, just enough movement, to signal others. In the distance, rustling. Not wind. Not animals. More of them. They were coming. Back at Haven Point, Reese stood at the watchtower, watching the flare light up in the south forest. His jaw clenched. He knew what it meant. He tapped twice on the emergency panel. Red lights flashed silently throughout the compound. The pre-agreed signal for all-out defense prep. In the classrooms, families woke. Parents gripped their children tighter. Teens gathered supplies. The council was already convening. Reese briefed them without wasting time. They found us. Mara's assistant, Lonnie, asked the question on everyone's mind. Do we run? Reese shook his head. Not yet. Kira's out there. If she can thin their numbers, we might survive the night. But if not, then we make the last stand. Back in the forest, Kira's team ran through the trees, ducking low, keeping silent. The whispers were everywhere now, gliding between trunks, emerging from shadows like living nightmares. But they didn't charge. They surrounded. This isn't random, Julian whispered. They're pushing us somewhere. Kira's heart sank. They're hurting us. The whispers wanted them alive, or at least close enough to Haven Point to lead the rest straight there. That's when Kira made the call. We split up, she said. Draw them away. Confuse them. Trev grinned. Been waiting to go out with a bang. Kira grabbed his arm. No bang. Not yet. Just buy us time. Trev nodded once and darted off into the trees, already slashing his way through a small group of whispers with terrifying silence. Mara went east. Julian headed back toward the camp with Kira, who carried the precious thermal scope now. They leapt over fallen logs, slid under thorny branches, and never once stopped moving. Suddenly, Julian stumbled. He had stepped into a shallow pit trap lined with jagged metal. His leg was caught, and blood pooled quickly. Kira dropped beside him, panicked but quiet. Julian gritted his teeth. "Go! I'll scream if they get close." Kira shook her head violently. "We don't leave our own." Then she did something insane. She pulled out the flare Julian had taken off the Whisper earlier, and ignited it. The red light screamed into the trees like a beacon. Back at Haven Point, Rhys saw it burst through the canopy. "That's her," he whispered. Then came the second flare, blue, Rhys's signal color. The camp erupted into motion. Kira dragged Julian as fast as she could. Whispers were closing in. One lunged from the side. Kira kicked it back into a tree. Another tried to tackle her, but Julian, despite the pain, swung a metal rod he'd carried in his pack and cracked the thing's skull. They made it to the edge of Haven Point just as the gates opened, Rhys and two guards pulling them inside and slamming the barrier shut behind them. Kira collapsed, panting. Julian passed out. Rhys looked at the forest, now alive with movement. "They're not coming blindly," he said. "They're coming with purpose." To be continued in Part 4, When the Walls Fall. The first whisper came at dawn, not from the undead, but from the wind. It slid across the top of the trees like a warning, curling through the cracks in Haven Point's barricades. Kira stood on the wall, crossbow in hand, watching the tree line for movement. She hadn't slept. Neither had Rhys. Neither could afford to. The flares last night had drawn the attention of the Whispers, but something else had changed. They were no longer testing the camp. They were waiting for something. Julian lay unconscious in the infirmary, his leg bound tight and packed with antibiotics. Mara refused to leave his side. Kira had offered to stay, but Julian's last words before passing out had been clear. "Protect the camp. Don't let Rhys give up." Now Kira stood between the growing threat in the woods and the growing tension inside Haven Point. Down in the main hall, the council gathered again. Their voices, kept low by habit, were tense and clipped. Rhys stood at the front. "We don't have time. We have to assume a breach is coming. We start immediate evacuation protocols. Prioritize children, elderly, and anyone non-combat capable." Lonnie, the youngest council member, spoke up. "We have food for another 3 weeks. Water filtration is still working. If we leave now, we risk more lives on the road than if we defend this place." Another elder leaned in. "The Whispers have learned us. They know silence better than we do. How long before they use it against us?" Rhys looked at the others. "They already have." The room went still. They herded Kira's team back to Haven Point. "They wanted us to see them. It's psychological warfare now. And they're winning." A thud echoed against the southern wall. Then another. And another. Rhys's face turned to stone. "They're here." Up top, Kira saw them. Not a horde, not a frenzied stampede. A line. Hundreds of Whispers, standing perfectly still along the tree line. Silent. Unmoving. Watching. Then, as if by cue, the front row knelt, and a second wave stepped forward. These ones carried scavenged weapons, makeshift shields, rusted knives, even broken crossbows. Kira's stomach churned. They've organized. Inside the perimeter, chaos built quickly. Survivors scrambled into positions. Makeshift barricades were reinforced. Families were ushered underground into the storage tunnels. There weren't enough weapons for everyone, but Rhys had trained them well: bows, slings, anything that didn't make noise. Trev returned with 5 others from the North Patrol, bloodied but alive. They're surrounding the camp. But they're not rushing us. Then what are they waiting for? Kira asked. Trev's face hardened. A signal. At midday, the sky grew dark. Not from clouds, but from smoke. A plume rose to the east, where the forest thickened beyond their patrol range. Something was burning. Reese raised his scope. His breath caught. Camp 37. He handed the scope to Kira. She saw the outline of a burned structure, distant but distinct. Smoke climbed high. There were signs of a fight, scorched bodies, twisted metal fencing. But more than anything else, movement. Dozens more whispers were marching westward from the ruins. Tyler, still barely clinging to life in the infirmary, groaned through cracked lips. "You don't understand, that wasn't their nest. That was ours." Kira looked at him. "What?" Camp 37 didn't fall. It changed sides. As night fell, the first attack came, not from the forest, but from inside. One of the tunnels collapsed. Explosives, old mining charges. Someone had placed them. Someone inside Haven Point. Panic spread fast. People screamed. Kira and Reese rushed to the site, where rubble and fire blocked the eastern escape tunnel. 2 were dead. 4 injured. Trev shouted from the tower. "They're moving. East wall." The whispers surged forward, not loud, but like a tidal wave of silence. They didn't moan or growl. They advanced with precision, scaling the wooden spikes and breaking through the first layer of barricades. Kira, Reese, and a handful of others engaged immediately, crossbows firing, blades flashing in the torchlight. For every whisper they dropped, 2 more replaced them. And then came the shriek. Not from a whisper, but from a girl. A whisper had gotten inside. The chaos broke the silent code. Screams erupted. Doors slammed. Panic became noise, and noise became death. Reese grabbed Kira by the arm. "We can't hold this wall." Kira shook her head. "We can't run. Then we collapse it." He pointed to the support beams. "We draw them in, then blow the wall behind them. Trap them in the breach." Kira blinked. "We don't have enough time." Reese was already running, torch in hand. Inside the breach, as dozens of whispers poured through, Reese lit the final charge. The blast was deafening. The east wall collapsed, burying the whispers, and part of the gate, with them. The dust settled slowly. Kira stood coughing, bleeding, but alive. Reese limped out from the smoke. For now, they had held. But only for now. Dawn broke over a ruined east wall. The air was thick with ash and the sickening stench of burned flesh. Haven Point was still standing, but barely. Survivors moved like ghosts among the wreckage, dragging away bodies, patching wounds, and reinforcing the broken barricades with whatever they could find. Kira stood over the smoldering debris, jaw clenched, eyes red from smoke and grief. They had lost 5 people in the breach, another 3 from the tunnel collapse. Children were crying in the underground shelter. Food supplies had been buried in the rubble. And worse, the enemy knew exactly where to hit. Someone inside was feeding them information. Reese, with his arm in a sling and his leg bandaged tight, limped up beside her. "We need to find the rat before they bring the whole hive crashing in." Kira nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "No more flares. No more signals. We lock it down. No one leaves until we find them." By mid-morning, suspicion spread like a second infection. Accusations flew. The council called an emergency gathering in the old library, turning the long reading tables into interrogation stations. Reese oversaw the questioning. Kira watched silently from the back, scanning faces, reading body language. Most were scared, some angry, and a few, far too calm. Mara took the lead in questioning survivors who had been near the tunnel before the blast. Several claimed they'd seen a hooded figure late at night, someone who moved too quietly, didn't speak, and never slept in the same place twice. Julian, still recovering, tried to sit up when he heard that. "There was someone, in the supply shed," he said, wincing. "2 nights ago. Thought I imagined it." Kira leaned in. "What were they doing?" Moving crates, like they were searching for something. But not food. Something hidden. She froze. Reese glanced at her. You thinking what I'm thinking? Yeah. The radio. 2 years ago, Haven Point had discovered a salvaged military radio buried in one of the long-range supply runs. It had been kept secret, only Reese, the original founders, and a handful of engineers knew it existed. They kept it locked in the generator room under the greenhouse. The theory had always been, if the world is out there, they'll call us. Now Kira sprinted toward the greenhouse. She and Reese arrived moments later to find the lock smashed. The door wide open. The radio console still humming, active. Someone had sent a signal. And worse, they'd left it transmitting. Inside, Lonnie and Trev arrived seconds later. Lonnie scanned the wires. It's transmitting a shortwave burst on repeat. Someone sent a ping. Then left the frequency open. Kira's eyes narrowed. Coordinates? Trev pulled the paper from the transmitter's side. Written in rushed handwriting were numbers, and a name. Camp 37. The council reconvened, this time in private. Only Kira, Reese, Lonnie, and Trev sat in the locked room. Someone here wanted the Whispers to know we're alive, Kira said. And they're working with whatever's left of 37. Reese's voice was low and bitter. They're not just working with the Whispers. They've joined them. The room went still. Trev leaned forward. If Camp 37 turned, that means there are other survivors out there. Survivors who think the only way to live is to become like them. Kira's hand clenched around the note. That means this isn't just a war against the undead. It's a war against the idea of survival at any cost. Lonnie's voice broke the silence. And someone here agrees with that idea. Later that night, while the survivors tried to sleep, Kira and Reese moved through Haven Point in silence. Watching. Listening. That's when they saw her, moving alone, toward the old barn, clutching a backpack. Kira signaled to Reese, then followed. The barn creaked as the figure entered. Kira waited a moment, then slipped inside. Put it down. The figure froze. Then slowly turned. It was Mara. What are you doing? Kira asked, crossbow raised. Mara's face was calm, too calm. I'm making sure we survive. By sending our location to the monsters? They're not monsters, Mara whispered. They're the future. Kira took a step forward. You helped them kill children. I saved them from suffering. Mara's voice cracked. What future do they have here? Starving? Screaming? Waiting to be torn apart by the next wave? Reese stepped in behind her, gun raised. You gave up on us. I woke up, Mara hissed. 37 showed me. They showed me that silence isn't survival, it's surrender. But with the Whispers, we can be stronger. They protect those who follow. They don't fear. They command. Kira lowered her crossbow slightly. Where's the next attack coming from? Mara smirked. It's already begun. A bell rang out, one of the watch signals. Reese spun around. North wall. Trev's voice boomed across the compound. We've got movement, inside the outer perimeter. Mara lunged suddenly, drawing a knife, but Kira didn't hesitate. The bolt sank deep into Mara's shoulder, dropping her instantly. As she gasped, blood pooling beneath her, she whispered, They're already here. Darkness cloaked Haven Point once more, but this time, it brought something far worse than the night. The northern wall was under attack. Not by a frenzied swarm of moaning corpses, but by silence. Controlled. Tactical. Precise. The Whispers moved like phantoms, darting between shadows, scaling defenses with eerie coordination. No growls. No shouts. Just the soft crunch of footsteps and the quiet thud of metal striking wood. Reese barked orders from the central tower, his voice calm but sharp. Archers, second level. Spear teams on the breach line, silent communication only. Kira was already on the northern barricade, her crossbow loaded, sweat mixing with blood on her brow. Trev and Lonnie flanked her, directing the few fighters Haven Point had left. Below, shadows danced across the field like living smoke. They moved unnaturally fast, some crawling low on all fours, others leaping forward with the grace of predators. These weren't typical undead. These were trained. "Do not speak," Kira warned her team, whispering low. They respond to sound. Even whispers. As if summoned by her words, one of the silent attackers burst forward, scaling the outer spike wall and vaulting onto the ledge. Kira fired instantly, the bolt taking it through the neck. It fell backward with a whisper of air, but 5 more replaced it. Lonnie hissed, "They're probing the line." Trev's voice, barely audible, answered, "No. They're mapping it." In the chaos below, makeshift flares ignited the sky, blue, then green, then red. 3 different colors. 3 different points of attack. Reese's voice crackled through the short-range radios. "All fronts, stand by. Repeat, we are being encircled. Fall back to Phase 2 defense." Phase 2. The fallback plan no one ever wanted to use. The courtyard. Where all 50 survivors would have to hold the line, together. As Haven Point's defenders pulled back, the outer perimeter was swallowed by shadows. The whispers surged inward, consuming every inch of open space, every guard post, every tower. But the survivors didn't run in fear, they moved with purpose. Silent hand signals passed down the lines, leading families through side tunnels and narrow alleys to the fortified center. The courtyard was surrounded by stacked cargo containers, concrete barriers, and mounted spotlights powered by the last of their solar reserves. It wasn't much. But it was the last stand. Julian, still injured, had pulled himself to the command room beside Reese. He spoke through gritted teeth. "They'll breach the gates within minutes." Reese didn't respond. He was staring at a map. Thinking. Plotting. "We can't win this by holding ground," he finally said. "We have to break them. Disorient them." Julian coughed. "And how do we do that?" Reese's eyes flicked up toward the fuel depot. "We light up the sky." In the courtyard, Kira was organizing the final defense. Bowmen lined the rooftops of nearby sheds. Spear-wielders took the front rows, forming a jagged shield wall. Behind them, the children and non-combatants crouched, weapons in hand, terrified but ready. That's when she saw it, the front gate sagging under pressure. A moment later, it buckled completely. The whispers flowed into the compound like a black tide. No screaming. No thunderous charge. Just quiet, brutal force. The first wave hit the spear wall. Blades met flesh. The sound of combat was a rhythm of grunts and steel, muted, almost ritualistic. Kira fought at the front, every movement calculated and efficient. She didn't waste a single breath, didn't cry out. Neither did her team. They had learned to survive in silence, and now, they would use that silence as a weapon. But for every whisper they killed, another stepped over the body and pressed on. Above, Reese and Julian watched from the tower. Reese turned the final key on the fuel depot's remote ignition system. "Get ready to blind them." Julian whispered, "We only get one shot." Reese's finger hovered over the button. Then, he pressed it. A moment later, the western wall exploded in a blaze of fire and light. The entire camp shook. Whispers shrieked, not with voices, but with motion. They staggered, covered their eyes, broke formation. The sudden flash disrupted their advance. Kira took the opportunity. "Now," she hissed to the defenders. "Push forward." With renewed strength, the survivors charged, not back, but forward, into the confusion. For the first time, the whispers faltered. By dawn, the fires still burned along the western wall. Dozens of whisper bodies lay scattered across the courtyard. But so did several of Haven Point's own. Kira stood on trembling legs, surveying the battlefield. They had survived the night. Barely. Trev approached, face grim. We lost 13. Kira's heart sank. Reese joined them, leaning heavily on a crutch. But we're still here. And they're not inside our walls. Kira looked toward the horizon. They will be back. Reese nodded. Then we have to end this. On our terms. To be continued in Part 7, the final hunt begins. The fires along Haven Point's western wall had burned out by midday, leaving only blackened earth and twisted metal. Smoke still curled into the sky, rising like a warning to any who dared come close. Inside the courtyard, survivors were silent, but not from fear. From focus. They were preparing. Reese leaned over a makeshift war table in the greenhouse, surrounded by Kira, Lonnie, Trev, and Julian, who had finally managed to stand on his own. A rough map of the region was spread out, dotted with red XS and hand-drawn markers. At the center of it all was a single label. Camp 37. Julian tapped it. We strike there. Hard. Fast. Before they regroup. Reese nodded. We know where they are. We know they're led by defectors and trained fighters. We don't have numbers, but we have will. And we have fury, Kira added. Lonnie looked up from her notes. It's not just about revenge. That camp controls communications. They're the ones sending signals to other whisper cells. If we take them out, we cut the cord. Trev spoke quietly. This isn't just a fight. It's the fight. That evening, Haven Point's 50 survivors gathered in the central courtyard. Every one of them was armed, some with blades, others with bows, and a few with salvaged firearms. Kira stood before them, her voice steady but low. You've all seen what they are. You've seen what they want. Silence. Obedience. Submission. She paused, looking around at the weary, determined faces. They think they've broken us. They think we'll lie down and die quietly. But they've forgotten something. She raised her blade. We are not quiet anymore. We're done surviving. We fight. A cheer rose, not loud, but sharp, like a spark igniting. They moved out at dusk, splitting into 3 groups. Group 1, led by Kira, would infiltrate the northern ridge, using the mountain shadows to approach the camp undetected. Group 2, Reese, Julian, and Lonnie, would circle west to sabotage the Whisper's power source, a generator scavenged from a fallen city outpost. Group 3, Trev and the remaining fighters, would set traps along the escape routes, preventing any Whispers from calling reinforcements or fleeing. They moved in silence, only hand signals and shortwave taps guiding them. The plan was simple: strike at midnight. Overwhelm. Burn the camp to the ground. No survivors. Kira's team reached the ridge just before midnight. From the cliffside, Camp 37 sprawled out below, rows of tents, watchtowers, and fencing made from bones and scrap metal. Fires burned low in barrels. Figures moved silently between structures. Dozens of them. She signaled to her team, wait for the boom. Reese crouched beside the west generator, wires exposed, sweat dripping from his brow. Lonnie monitored the perimeter while Julian planted charges. 15 seconds, Julian whispered. Get clear, Reese said. They sprinted just as the explosion erupted in a flash of fire and smoke. Camp 37 was plunged into darkness. Seconds later, all hell broke loose. Kira's group surged down the slope. No time for stealth now. The defenders inside the camp were disoriented by the darkness and explosion. Some screamed, broke silence, and immediately triggered attacks from their own infected. Chaos tore through the camp. Arrows flew. Blades clashed. Screams echoed across the hill. Kira fought like a storm. Every whisper she brought down was another piece of Haven Point's pain answered. Her team fanned out, cutting through tents, disabling towers, setting fire to supplies. It wasn't just a raid. It was justice. At the back of the camp, Reese's team rejoined Trev's group. They had sealed the southern pass with firebombs, trapping dozens of Whispers inside their own walls. There would be no retreat. Julian spotted a group trying to flee through the northern watchpoint. He raised his rifle and whispered, "Not tonight." One by one, they dropped. The fighting lasted only 20 minutes. But it felt like a lifetime. By the end, Camp 37 was nothing but smoke and ruin. The silence, the unnatural, terrifying stillness that had followed the whispers everywhere, was gone. Kira stood in the center of the burning camp, her blade coated in ashen blood, her breath ragged. Reese approached. "We did it." "No," she said softly. "We're doing it. One step at a time." He nodded. "The rest of the world doesn't know we exist." "They will," she replied. "Because now, we're going to take the fight to them." Smoke rose from what remained of Camp 37. The blackened skeletons of watchtowers creaked in the wind, their charred beams still smoldering. Corpses, human and inhuman, littered the camp. The scent of blood, fire, and ash hung heavy in the air. But among the ruins, stood survivors. Kira limped toward the center of the camp, her blade still clutched in her hand. Behind her, the others moved in a quiet, exhausted haze, faces smudged with dirt and dried blood, but eyes wide open. They had done the impossible. The whispers were gone. Reese climbed onto a pile of rubble and raised his voice. "They thought silence would conquer us. But we broke the silence. And now they know we're still here." A tired but proud cheer rippled through the crowd. Lonnie, her shoulder bandaged and bruised, held up a salvaged transmitter from the Whisper camp. "We found this near their command post. It's still operational." Trev stepped closer. "Can we use it?" Julian knelt beside the device, inspecting its wires and circuitry. After a few tense moments, he gave a sharp nod. "I can get it working." Reese looked out at the 50 survivors, now gathered in a wide circle. "Then we send a message. Not just to the Whispers. To everyone." An hour later, as dawn broke over the scorched horizon, the transmitter crackled to life. Julian adjusted the mic, then handed it to Kira. She stared at it for a moment, then spoke, her voice soft but steady. "To anyone listening, this is Haven Point. We're alive. We survived. And we fought back." She paused, taking a breath. "They came in silence. They wanted control. They wanted fear. But they didn't break us. They won't break you." Reese stepped beside her. "There are more of them out there. More Whisper camps. More undead. But there are also more survivors. We know it." Julian added, "If you hear this, don't stay silent. Respond. Join us. Help us fight back." Trev gave a small, grim smile. "This isn't the end. This is the beginning." Over the next days, the survivors turned Camp 37 into a base. They reinforced walls, buried the fallen, and repurposed the Whisper supplies, medicine, gear, even maps that led to other outposts. For the first time in years, they were no longer running. They were building. Reese organized patrol routes and intel-gathering missions. Lonnie began training others in communication and code. Julian repaired the generators and solar panels. Trev and a few skilled scavengers built new weapons and upgraded defenses. And Kira, she trained the next line of fighters. Teenagers who had grown up in hiding. Mothers who had lost everything. Survivors who had nothing left but the will to protect. They called themselves the Ashborn. Because from the ashes, they would rise. One night, as Kira stood on a high watchtower, the wind rustling through the quiet camp, she saw a blinking light on the transmitter console. A response. Julian ran to it and decoded the signal. "It's from a group 200 miles south," he said, eyes wide. "They heard us. They're coming." Kira's heart pounded. Not from fear, but from hope. Hope was a dangerous thing in a world like theirs. But tonight, it was real. 3 weeks later, more signals came in. Dozens of them. Small communities. Scattered fighters. Isolated families. All of them listening. All of them answering. And slowly, a network began to form, a resistance, spread across the dead zones of the world. A movement of voices refusing to be silent any longer. Haven Point was no longer just a refuge. It was a beacon. The war wasn't over. Far from it. But the survivors of Haven Point had made their stand, and proved something powerful. That even in a world where silence meant death, hope could still speak loud enough to shake the dead. The end. Thank you for following this journey. Stay tuned for more tales of survival, hope, and the undead. Man Zombie Fire. Let me know if you want the sequel next.